I thought the worst man in my life was behind me until the elevator doors closed and I realized I had just stepped into something far more dangerous. My lungs burned as I ran, heels slipping against polished marble, the sound of footsteps behind me, too steady, too close. Ryan didn't shout anymore, and that was what terrified me the most. Silence meant he was focused, meant he wasn't going to stop. I hit the corner too fast, nearly crashing into a metal cart, my shoulders stinging, but I didn't slow down. I couldn't. The hallway stretched too long, too empty, fluorescent lights flickering overhead like they were warning me to turn back. I couldn't. The elevator at the end of the corridor became the only thing that mattered, a narrow silver door that looked like escape, like air, like something that could close between me and everything I was trying to leave behind. I slammed the button once, twice, three times, my fingers trembling. The seconds dragged heavy like they were working against me. Then a soft ding, the door slid open, and I rushed inside without thinking, without looking. I turned fast, hitting the close button again and again, my breath coming in sharp, broken pieces. The doors began to slide shut, and for 1 second I thought I made it. I really thought I was safe. Then I felt it, not a sound, not a movement, just a presence, the kind that changes the air before you even understand why. I looked up slowly, and he was already watching me, tall, still, dressed in a black suit that fit like it had been made for him alone, one hand resting casually at his side, the other adjusting the cuff of his sleeve. Like none of this mattered, like I hadn't just fallen into his space, like my panic didn't exist. His eyes met mine, dark, steady, unreadable, and something in my chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with running. The elevator doors sealed with a soft final click, and suddenly the world outside was gone, just gone, leaving only the quiet hum of the cables and the sound of my breathing, too loud, too uneven. I stepped back instinctively until my spine hit the cold metal wall. I should say something, I knew I should, but the words wouldn't come because something about him made speaking feel like a mistake, like I was stepping into rules I didn't understand. Then from outside, a sudden bang. Ryan's voice cut through the hallway, shouting my name, the sound muffled by steel, but still there, still chasing me. My heart jumped into my throat. My hand flew toward the control panel, but before I could press anything, he moved, not fast, not aggressive, just deliberate, his fingers reaching past mine to press a single button. The elevator jerked slightly, then stopped completely between floors, the sudden stillness swallowing the noise outside like it had never existed. I froze, my eyes snapping back to his. He didn't look at the panel. He looked at me, calm, controlled, like he had already decided something I didn't know. I was part of. Stay, he said, his voice low, even, and it wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The words settled into the space between us like it belonged there, like it had always been waiting. I shook my head automatically, my pulse racing. You don't understand. I understand enough. He interrupted, not harsh, just certain, and that certainty did something worse than fear. It made me hesitate. The elevator remained suspended, the world outside unreachable, Ryan's voice fading as if distance had swallowed him whole. And for the first time since I started running, I wasn't being chased, I was being watched, and somehow that felt more dangerous. His gaze moved over me, quick, precise, taking in everything, the shaking hands, the uneven breath, the fear I couldn't hide, and then it stopped at my eyes, holding there like he was measuring something I couldn't see. You're safer here, he said, and there was no warmth in it, no comfort, just a statement that felt like a decision I hadn't agreed to. My stomach dropped, because I realized something in that moment, something cold and absolute. I hadn't escaped anything, I had only changed who I was running from, and the man standing in front of me didn't look like someone who let anything go once it was. Inside his world, the silence stretched longer than it should have, the kind of silence that made every small sound feel amplified. My heartbeat, the faint hum of the elevator, the quiet shift of fabric as he moved just slightly, and I realized I was still holding my breath. I forced myself to inhale slow, unsteady air filling my lungs as I tried to think clearly. This was just a man, just another stranger in a building, except nothing about him felt ordinary, nothing about the way he stood there completely at ease in a locked elevator with a frightened woman and a man shouting outside felt normal. My fingers curled tighter against the cold metal rail behind me. Please, I said finally, my voice thinner than I wanted it to be. I need to get out. He did not move. Did not even glance at the control panel. His gaze remained fixed on me like I had become the only variable in a situation he already controlled. Not yet, he replied, and those two words landed heavier than they should have, because they were not a suggestion, they were a decision. My stomach tightened. I shook my head, stepping forward despite myself. You cannot just stop the elevator like this. Someone is looking for me. I have to go. His eyes flickered slightly at that, not surprise, not confusion. Something closer to recognition, like he had expected those exact words. I know, he said quietly, and that was when something shifted in the air again, not fear, not panic, something colder, something that made my skin prickle, you know? I repeated the question, coming out sharper than I intended. His head tilted just a fraction, studying me like I had just confirmed something important. He has been following you for 12 minutes, he said, and my mind stalled completely. 12 minutes, the number echoed in my head louder than anything else, because that meant this was not random, this was not coincidence. How do you know that? I asked, and for the first time since I stepped inside the elevator, my voice carried something other than fear. It carried doubt, suspicion. He exhaled softly, almost amused, but not quite. Because you were not the only one being watched tonight. The words settled into me slowly, each one heavier than the last. I felt it, then the realization creeping in piece by piece. I had been running from one man, but I had stepped into the presence of another, who had already seen everything before I even realized I was in danger. My throat went dry. Who are you? I whispered the question, slipping out before I could stop it. And this time he did move, just one step closer, not enough to invade my space, but enough to make the distance between us feel intentional, measured, like every inch mattered. Someone who does not like loose ends, he said, and the calm in his voice made the meaning behind it impossible to ignore. My pulse spiked again, not from Ryan, not from the hallway outside, but from him, from the man who had stopped the world with a single button press, who spoke like outcomes were things he arranged, not things that happened. I am not a loose end, I said quickly, the words tumbling over each other. I did not see anything, I do not know anything, I just need to leave. His gaze held mine, unwavering, and for a moment I thought I saw something shift there, something almost thoughtful, before it disappeared behind that same controlled stillness. You ran into my elevator without looking, he said. That makes you involved whether you want to be or not. My breath caught, because he was right, and that truth felt like a trap closing quietly around me. The elevator remained suspended between floors, neither moving up nor down, and I realized that was exactly where I was too. Not safe, not in danger, not free, not caught, just waiting for him to decide what happened next. A soft vibration broke the tension, his phone lighting briefly in his hand. He glanced at it once, then back at me, and something in his expression settled, like a decision had just been made somewhere far beyond my understanding. He will not follow you anymore tonight, he said, and the certainty in that sentence sent a chill through me, not because of what it meant for Ryan, but because of how easily he said it, like outcomes bent in his direction without resistance. My fingers tightened at my sides. What happens now? I asked quietly, and this time when he looked at me there was no hesitation, no pause, just a simple answer delivered like it had already been written long before I stepped into that elevator. Now you stay where I can see you, he said, and for the first time since this began, I understood something clearly. Escaping had never been the end of the story, it had only been the beginning. The words settled into me, heavier than the locked air around us. Now you stay where I can see you. I stared at him, trying to understand how a sentence so simple could feel like a door closing somewhere behind me. My mind raced, searching for something logical, something normal to hold on to, but nothing about this felt normal. Not the way he spoke, not the way he stood, like time itself adjusted to him, not the way the elevator remained perfectly still, as if it was waiting for his permission to move. I cannot stay, I said, forcing the words out steadier this time, even though my hands betrayed me, trembling slightly at my sides. I have a job, I have a life, I do not even know you. His gaze did not shift, not even a fraction. You will, he replied, and there was something final in that response, something that made arguing feel like pushing against a wall that had already been built long before I arrived. I swallowed hard, stepping sideways toward the panel again, my fingers hovering over the buttons like they might still belong to me, like I still had control over something. You cannot just decide things for me, I said, pressing the button for the nearest floor. The small light flickered under my touch, but nothing happened. The elevator did not move, the doors did not open, nothing changed. My breath caught as I pressed it again, harder this time, then another button, and another, still nothing. A quiet realization settled in my chest. He had not just stopped the elevator, he had taken control of it completely. I turned back to him slowly. What did you do? My voice dropped lower, not from calm, but from something closer to disbelief. He watched me for a moment, then reached past me, once again his hand moving with that same controlled precision, pressing a hidden panel I had not even noticed before. A soft click followed, and the elevator hummed faintly, as if acknowledging him alone. Now it moves when I want it to, he said, and the simplicity of that statement sent a chill through me, not because of what he did, but because of how easily he said it. Like control was not something he took, it was something he already owned. The elevator jolted gently, then began to rise smooth, steady, like nothing had ever interrupted it, but everything had. I felt it in the way my body tensed, in the way my thoughts struggled to catch up with what was happening. Where are we going? I asked, my voice quieter, now more careful. His eyes flicked briefly to the numbers above the door, then back to me. Somewhere he cannot reach you, he answered, and for a second that should have felt like relief. It should have, but it did not, because safety coming from him felt different. It felt conditional, like it existed only as long as he allowed it. I shifted my weight, glancing at the doors as the numbers climbed 10, 11, 12 each floor, taking me further away from everything familiar, further into something I did not understand. You do not even know me, I said again, softer this time, almost to myself. But he heard it, of course he did. Emily Carter, he said, and my entire body went still. The sound of my name in his voice was not loud, but it echoed louder than anything else in that enclosed space. My pulse spiked instantly. How do you know that? I whispered the question, barely leaving my lips. He did not answer right away. Instead, he studied me like he was deciding how much to say, how much I was allowed to know. Because I make it my business to know who steps into my world, he said finally. And there it was again, that word world. Like this elevator was not just a space, but an entrance, something I had crossed without realizing it. My chest tightened. I did not choose this, I said quickly, my voice rising just slightly before I caught it again. I just needed to get away from him, that is all. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes shifted almost imperceptibly. And you did, he said. You just did not realize what you were walking into. The elevator slowed, then the soft chime echoed as it reached its destination. My heart pounded harder with each second. The doors sliding open slowly, revealing a quiet, dimly lit floor unlike the others below. No voices, no movement, just stillness waiting. Beyond the threshold, I hesitated, my feet refusing to move as I looked back at him one last time, searching for something, anything that would tell me this was still my choice. His gaze held mine, steady, unyielding. And then he spoke again, his voice lower this time, but no less certain. Step out, Emily, he said. You are already where you belong now. I did not sleep that night the way normal people sleep. I drifted in and out of something thinner, lighter, like my mind refused to fully shut down inside a place that did not belong to me. The sheets were softer than anything I had ever owned. The room too quiet. The air carrying a faint scent of something expensive and controlled. It felt like a hotel. It felt like a cage. Every small sound pulled me back awake. A door closing somewhere far away. Footsteps that never rushed. The distant hum of a house that was too large to feel human. I kept thinking about his words. Not the threats. Not even the way he said my name like he had been saying it for years. It was the certainty. The quiet way he decided things before I even understood the rules of the game. By the time the first hint of morning light slipped through the heavy curtains, I had already given up on sleep. I sat up slowly, my bare feet touching a floor that was warm, heated from beneath, like even the ground here refused to feel cold. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to see. The estate stretched out like something from another world. Endless green, clean lines, silence that did not belong to a city. No sirens, no shouting, no life pressing in from all sides. Just control, just distance, just him. A soft knock came at the door. Not loud, not demanding, but it still made my shoulders tense. Miss Harper, a calm female voice said from the other side. Breakfast is ready whenever you are. I hesitated before answering. I'm not staying, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. A pause. Then, almost gently, that is not for me to decide. Of course it was not. I changed slowly, wearing the same clothes from last night, because everything else in the closet looked like it belonged to someone who lived a different life. When I opened the door, she was already there. Older, composed, watching me the way people here seem to watch everything. This way, she said softly. No force, no threat, just expectation. I followed anyway. The hallway stretched long and quiet, lined with artwork that probably cost more than my entire student debt. My footsteps felt too loud against the polished floor. I kept my arms close to my body, like I could make myself smaller inside a place that swallowed space. The dining room was already set. Sunlight spilled across a table that could have seated 10, but only one chair was occupied. He did not look up immediately. He was reading something on a tablet, one hand resting casually beside a cup of coffee that still steamed. Like nothing had happened last night. Like bringing me here was just another item on a schedule. You did not sleep, he said without looking at me. Not a question. I stopped a few feet from the table. You brought me here against my will. Now he looked up. Those dark eyes settled on me, steady, unreadable. And yet, he said quietly, you are still here. I opened my mouth, ready to argue, ready to push back, ready to remind him that I did not belong to him or this place or any of the rules he lived by. But the words caught somewhere between my chest and my throat. Because the truth sat heavier than anything I wanted to say. I had nowhere safer to go, and he knew it. He leaned back slightly, studying me like he was measuring something invisible. Eat, he said. You think better when you are not running on fear alone. I did not move. He did not repeat himself. The silence stretched. Controlled. Patient. Like he had all the time in the world. And somehow, without realizing when it happened, I stepped forward and sat down. I picked up the fork like it weighed more than it should. My hand did not shake, but it felt close, like something inside me had not decided whether to fight or give in. The food in front of me looked simple, but perfect. Eggs, toast, fresh fruit. Nothing extravagant. Nothing careless. Everything measured. Just like him. I took a small bite, more to prove a point than because I was hungry. He watched me for a moment, then returned his attention to the tablet, as if that single action had answered something for him. Good, he said quietly. You listen faster than most. I set the fork down. Do not confuse survival with obedience. That made him pause. Not long, just enough to feel it. Then a faint shift in his expression. Not quite a smile. Not quite approval. Something more dangerous. Fair, he said. But survival requires understanding the rules. I leaned forward slightly, then explained them. He set the tablet aside with deliberate care, folding his hands in front of him. Rule 1, he said, his voice calm, controlled. You are not a prisoner. I almost laughed. It came out softer than I expected. That is convenient. Rule 2, he continued, ignoring my tone. You are under my protection whether you accept it or not. There it was again. That word. Protection. It sounded different coming from him. He said it like ownership, like a fact that did not need agreement. I held his gaze. And what does that cost me? Silence stretched between us. Not empty. Waited. He stood slowly, moving around the table with unhurried steps. Every movement precise. Intentional. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that I could feel the shift in the air, the way space adjusted around him. That depends, he said, softer now, on how much trouble you decide to cause. I pushed back my chair and stood too, refusing to look up at him like I was smaller. I did not ask for any of this. No, he agreed. But you were already part of it. That hit harder than anything else. Because it was true. Derek. The debt. The night that could have ended differently if I had made one safer choice. One slower turn. 1 second of hesitation. I looked away first. Just for a second. That was all it took. I want to leave, I said, quieter now. Not weaker. Just honest. He studied me again, longer this time. Like he was deciding something that would not be undone. Not yet, he said. Not harsh. Not forceful. Final. My chest tightened. You do not get to decide that. His gaze did not change. I already did. The room felt smaller suddenly. The sunlight too bright against the polished table. I took a step back, needing space that did not belong to him. You keep saying I am not a prisoner, I said, my voice steady again. But you are not giving me a choice. He exhaled slowly, like I had. Reached a point he expected. Then, for the first time, something shifted in his tone. Not softer. Not kinder. Just more real. If you walk out that gate right now, he said, you will not make it past the end of the road without someone noticing. My stomach dropped. Not my men, he added, holding my eyes. The ones who think you still belong to a debt that has not been properly resolved. The words settled in my chest like cold water. Quiet. Heavy. I did not ask what that meant. I did not need to. He took one step back, giving me space this time. So no, he said, calm again, controlled again. You are not a prisoner. A pause. Just long enough to breathe. But you are not free either. I stood there, caught between anger and something far more dangerous. Understanding. And for the first time since last night, I realized the truth was not in what he had taken from me. It was in what he had stepped in front of. I did not answer him right away because there was nothing left to argue with, not when the truth had already settled between us like something solid and unmovable. I turned toward the window, instead needing distance, even if it was only a few steps. The sunlight outside looked the same as it always had, bright, clean, ordinary, but everything felt different now, like I was seeing it from behind glass. So what now? I asked quietly, my reflection faint in the glass, pale eyes tired, shoulders tighter than I. Remembered he did not respond immediately, and somehow that silence felt intentional, like he was giving the question the weight it deserved, or maybe measuring how I asked it. When I finally turned back, he had moved again, not closer, not farther, just enough that I had to notice. "Now you stay until the situation changes," he said. "And what situation is that exactly?" I pushed, because if I was going to be trapped here, I needed something more than half answers. His gaze held steady, the one where people stop looking for leverage. I frowned slightly. "Leverage?" He nodded once. "You." The word landed sharper than anything else he had said so far. I shook my head immediately. "I am not leverage, I am nobody." Something flickered in his expression, then not disagreement, not quite correction, something closer to certainty. "You are connected," he said. "That makes you valuable to the wrong people." My chest tightened again, because I knew what he meant even if I did not understand all of it. Yet Derek, his death, the way everything had escalated, too fast, too messy. I crossed my arms, instinctively grounding myself. "Then explain it to me clearly," I said. "No more vague warnings, no more half-truths. If I am supposed to stay here, I deserve to know why." The room went still, not silent, but focused, like everything had narrowed to this moment. He studied me longer this time, like he was deciding how much I could handle, or maybe how much he was willing to give. "Your ex was not acting alone," he said finally. My stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice lower, now more careful. "It means his debt did not belong to him anymore," he replied. "It was transferred, sold, passed along to people who do not forget and do not walk away empty-handed." A chill ran through me, slow and heavy. "And they think I am part of it." I said, more to myself than to him. "They think you are connected to what he owes," he corrected calmly, "which makes you either a way to collect or a way to pressure him." I took a step back, the words settling into place one by one until the full picture became impossible to ignore. "So I am not here because you want me here," I said, my voice tightening. "I am here because I am useful." Something in his gaze shifted again, sharper now, but not defensive. "You are here because you walked into my space at the exact moment I could choose what happened next," he said, "and I chose to keep you alive and out of their reach." I swallowed hard, because that word again, alive, like he was reminding me of something I had not fully processed yet. "That is not the same as choice," I said quietly. He did not deny it. Instead, he stepped slightly closer, not enough to invade, but enough that I could feel it again, that controlled presence, that steady pressure that never needed force. "No," he said, "it is not." The honesty in that single word caught me off guard more than anything else had so far. I held his gaze, searching for something that would make this simpler, something that would let me place him clearly as either threat or protection. But he was both, and that was the problem. "How long?" I asked finally. "How long do I have to stay here?" He looked at me for a moment, then passed me toward the window, like he was measuring time differently than I did. "Until they stop asking about you," he said, "or until I make sure they cannot." My breath caught slightly, because there was something final in the way he said it, not violent, not explicit, just certain, like outcomes were things he arranged, not things he waited for. I looked back at the sunlight outside, then at the door, then at him. And for the first time since I stepped into that elevator, I understood something clearly. I had not just stepped into his world, I had been placed in the center of it, and leaving was no longer just about walking away. It was about whether he decided the world outside would still let me go. The room felt quieter after that, like something had been said that could not be taken back, not loud, not dramatic, just final. I exhaled slowly and turned away from him again, not because I was done, but because I needed a second to catch up with everything he had just made clear. The sunlight had shifted slightly, casting longer lines across the floor. Time was moving, even if I felt stuck in place. "Can I at least walk outside?" I asked, still facing the window, my voice steadier, now more controlled. If I was going to survive this, I needed something that felt like mine, even if it was small. There was a pause behind me, then the soft sound of him moving, not rushed, not hesitant, just deliberate. "Yes," he said. My shoulders tensed slightly at how easy that answer came. I turned back slowly, narrowing my eyes just a little. "That was too fast," I said. He did not react to the suspicion. "Because I expected you to ask," he replied. "You are not the type to sit still for long, Something about that made my chest tighten, not fear, not anger, something closer to being understood, and I was not sure I liked that more than anything else. There are limits, he added, and there it was, the part one had been waiting for. Of course there are, I said quietly. Stay within the east grounds, he continued. Do not go near the gates alone, and if someone approaches you, do not engage. You come back inside immediately. I crossed my arms again. That sounds a lot like rules for someone who is not a prisoner. He held my gaze evenly. It sounds like someone who intends to keep you safe whether you agree with the method or not. I looked away first this time, not because I lost, but because I needed space from the way he said things like that, like protection and control were the same language. I stepped past him toward the door, not asking permission this time, just moving, because I needed to prove to myself that I still could. I felt his presence shift slightly behind me, not following, not stopping, just there, always there. When I reached the hallway, the same quiet stretched out in front of me, polished floors, distant doors, the faint scent of something clean and expensive. I kept walking, my pace steady, even as my thoughts moved faster than I wanted. The front doors opened before I reached them, like someone had been watching, like they always were. The air outside hit differently, cooler, lighter, real. I stepped out onto the stone path and stopped just for a second, letting it settle. The grounds were wider than they looked from the window, open space, framed by trees trimmed too perfectly, grass that looked untouched by anything messy or uncontrolled. I walked slowly at first, then a little farther, each step pulling me away from the house, even if only by a few feet. I kept my eyes moving, scanning, without meaning to, checking the distance to the gates, the placement of cameras, the quiet figures at the edges of the property, who did not move, but definitely noticed me. He had been right. This place was not empty. It was contained. After a few minutes, I stopped near the edge of the east lawn. The city was somewhere beyond the trees. I could not see it, but I could feel it, like a memory just out of reach. I wrapped my arms around myself, not from cold, but from something else, something quieter, something heavier. The realization that I could walk 10 steps or 100, but I was still inside a boundary I did not choose. A soft crunch of gravel behind me made me turn slightly. He had followed, not close enough to hover, not far enough to disappear, just there again, like a constant. I exhaled slowly. You do not trust me to walk alone, I said without looking directly at him. I trust the situation exactly as much as it deserves, he replied, his voice calm, carried easily in the open air. I nodded once, because that answer made sense. Even if I did not like it, I looked forward again toward the unseen city, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The silence felt different out here, less like pressure, more like space, but it did not change the truth. I was not being chased anymore, but I was not free either, and the man standing a few feet behind me was the reason for both. I stayed there longer than I meant to, standing at the edge of something that looked open but felt controlled. The wind moved lightly through the trees, carrying a quiet that did not belong to the city. It almost made it easier to think, almost. I let my arms drop to my sides and took a slow breath, then another, trying to steady something inside me that kept shifting between fear and something I could not name. If I am leverage, I said finally without turning around, why have they not already come for me? There was a brief pause behind me, like he was considering how much truth to give this time. Because they are not sure where you are yet, he said, and because the moment they are certain, they will move carefully. I turned, then watching him fully. Now his posture was the same, as always, relaxed, but controlled, like nothing could surprise him, like every outcome had already been accounted for carefully. I repeated, that does not sound reassuring. He did not react to the edge in my voice. It is not meant to be, he said simply. I took a step closer to him, this time closing some of the distance on my own terms. Then why tell me that at all? I asked. His eyes held mine steady, and there it was again, that quiet calculation that made it impossible to tell where honesty ended and strategy began. Because you keep asking for clarity, he said, and clarity is rarely comfortable. I let out a breath that almost turned into a laugh, but did not quite make it. That might be the first honest thing you have said all morning. Something shifted in his gaze again, not softer, not warmer, just slightly more present, like he acknowledged that more than anything else I had said so far. I looked past him briefly toward the house, then back at the open grounds. You said they think I am connected to the debt, I continued. So what happens if they realize I am not worth anything? He tilted his head slightly. That depends on what they believe. You know, my stomach tightened again. I do not know anything, I said quickly. His expression did not change. That has never stopped anyone before. The words settled heavily between us, and I hated how true they sounded. I wrapped my arms around myself again, not from cold, but from the way everything kept Narrowing down to one point, I had stepped into something bigger than me, and now I was inside it whether I understood it or not. You keep saying you are protecting me, I said after a moment. But you are also the reason I am still here. He did not deny it, he never did. Both can be true. He said. I looked at him, searching for something, anything that would make that easier to accept. Why? I asked quietly this time, not challenging, not pushing, just asking. Why me? The question hung there longer than I expected. He did not answer right away, and for the first time since I met him, I saw something that almost looked like hesitation, not uncertainty, just a pause that felt different from the rest. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, not weaker, just less distant. Because you ran into my space when I had a choice to make, he said, and I do not ignore things that become my responsibility. I frowned slightly. Responsibility, I repeated like the word did not fit right coming from him. You do not even know me. I know enough, he said, and there was something in that tone that made it harder to argue with than it should have been. I shook my head, stepping back again, trying to create distance from the way that answer settled under my skin. That is not a reason, I said quietly. He held my gaze 1 second longer, then spoke again, and this time there was no calculation in it, no strategy, no distance, just something direct and impossible to misread. It is for me. The air felt different after that, like something had shifted just enough to change the shape of the moment. I looked at him longer than I meant to, then away toward the trees again, because holding that eye contact suddenly felt like standing too close to something I did not understand. And for the first time since all of this began, I realized the danger was not just the people outside those gates, it was the way he said things like that, and how part of me did not immediately want to walk away from them. The air between us did not return to normal after that. It stayed altered, like something had been said that could not be undone. I kept my eyes on the trees longer than necessary, tracing the edges of something I could not quite define inside my chest. It would have been easier if he had lied, easier if everything about him stayed predictable, cold, distant, controlled, but that one answer had not been any of those things, and it made everything harder to place. I exhaled slowly, then turned back toward him again, because standing here pretending it did not matter was not going to change anything. You talk like everything is already decided, I said, my voice quieter now. Not weak, just more careful, like I do not get a say in any of this. He did not interrupt, did not correct, just watched me with that same steady focus that never seemed to waver. That is because some things are already in motion, he said, whether you agree with them or not. I shook my head slightly, stepping closer again, this time not out of defiance, but because distance was starting to feel like avoidance. And what about the things that are not decided yet? I asked. Do I get a say in those? There was a pause, not long, but real. His gaze shifted slightly, like he was considering something beyond the surface of the question. That depends on whether your choices create more risk, he said. I let out a small breath that almost sounded like frustration. So I only get a choice if it fits your definition of safe, I said. Not safe, he corrected calmly. Controlled. I looked at him sharply at that word, because at least this time he did not try to soften it. That is not better, I said. It is more honest, he replied, and again that honesty hit harder than anything else I could have argued against. I turned away again, pacing a few steps along the edge of the lawn, my shoes pressing lightly into the gravel, each step grounding me just enough to keep thinking clearly. What happens if I refuse to follow those rules? I asked without looking at him. Then I adjust them, he said simply. I stopped walking at that, turning back slowly. That is not how this works, I said. That is exactly how this works, he replied, and there was no edge in his voice, no threat, just fact. And that made it worse. I held his gaze for a long second, trying to find the line between control and protection and failing to separate them completely. You are not used to people saying no to you, I said quietly. Something shifted again, not anger, not offense, something closer to recognition. No, he said. I am not used to people staying long enough to matter if they do. The words caught me off guard more than they should have. I blinked once, then looked away, because holding that moment felt like stepping into something deeper than I intended. I am not staying, I said automatically, like saying it would make it true again. You are still here, he replied, and there it was again, that quiet certainty that never needed to be raised to be heard. I exhaled slowly, pressing my lips together before speaking again. Only because I do not have another option right now, I said. Then use the one you have, he answered. I frowned slightly. And what option is that? He stepped a fraction closer, not enough to close the distance completely, but enough that I felt it again, that shift in the air, that presence that never forced itself, but never left either. Learn the rules before you try to break them. He said. I let that sit for a second longer then. I wanted to because part of me knew he was right even if I hated it. I looked past him toward the house again, then back at him, my thoughts quieter, now more focused. And if I decide I do not want to play by them at all? I asked. His gaze held mine steady, unwavering. And when he answered, there was no hesitation, no calculation, just the same calm certainty that had followed every word since the beginning. Then I will make sure the world outside those gates does not punish you for it. My breath caught. Slightly, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it, like it was already decided, like it had been decided the moment I stepped into that elevator. And for the first time, I realized something that made everything else shift. I was not just being kept here, I was being accounted for, and somehow that felt more permanent than any locked door ever could. I did not move right away after he said that. The words stayed in the air, between us, settling into something heavier than the quiet around us. I could feel it in the way my chest tightened, not from fear this time, but from the realization that nothing about this was temporary, not in the way I wanted it to be. I looked down at my hands for a second, grounding myself, before lifting my gaze back to him. You make it sound like this is already permanent, I said quietly. He did not answer immediately, and that pause felt different from the others, not calculated, not measured, just real enough to notice. Nothing is permanent, he said finally. But some things last longer than expected. I let out a slow breath, turning slightly away from him again, my eyes tracing the line of the trees like I could find an exit hidden somewhere between them. That is not exactly comforting, I said. He did not argue with that. He never argued when the truth was obvious. Instead, he stepped closer, not enough to crowd me, just enough that I was aware of him without turning. Comfort is not the priority right now, he said. Stability is. I frowned slightly at that word because it sounded almost normal, almost reasonable if it had come from anyone else. You call this stable? I asked, glancing back at him. I was chased into an elevator yesterday, and now I am standing on someone else's property being told I cannot leave. His gaze did not shift. You are not being chased anymore, he said. That is the difference. I held his eyes for a second longer because that part was true, and I hated how much that mattered. So this is better, I said quietly. This is controlled. He corrected again, and there it was, that word that kept coming back like everything here revolved around it. I looked away. First, this time not because I could not hold his gaze, but because I needed to think without feeling like every reaction was being read. What if I want my life back? I asked after a moment, softer now, less sharp, more honest. He did not respond right away, and for a second I thought he might not answer at all. Then I heard it, his voice lower than before, not distant, not detached, just direct. Then we make sure there is still a life to go back to. I turned fully at that, my brows pulling together slightly. And if there is not? I asked. He met my gaze without hesitation. Then we build something that works instead. The simplicity of that answer caught me off guard more than anything else he had said so far, because it did not sound like control. It sounded like a plan, like something already in motion. Whether I agreed with it or not, I shook my head slightly, stepping back again, putting space between us, because that felt safer than standing too close to something I could not fully understand. You talk like you can just decide things like that, I said, like you can replace what I had with something else. Not replace, he said calmly, adjust. I let out a quiet breath that almost turned into a laugh, but stopped halfway. That is not how people work, I said. That is how situations work, he replied, and again there was no hesitation in his voice, no doubt, just certainty. I looked at him longer this time, really looked at him, trying to understand how someone could speak like that without raising their voice, without forcing anything, and still sound like the outcome was already decided. You really believe that, do not you? I said softly. That you can control how this ends? He held my gaze steady. I believe I can influence it enough to keep you standing at the end of it. My chest tightened again at that, not because of the words, but because of how easily they came to him, like they were not dramatic, not exaggerated, just fact. I looked away again, toward the open grounds, the trees, the distance, the invisible line I could not cross. And for the first time since all of this began, I realized something that made everything else shift slightly. I was still thinking about leaving, but I was also starting to think about what staying might mean. And that thought felt more dangerous than anything waiting for me outside those gates. The thought stayed with me longer than I wanted it to, not loud, not overwhelming, just there sitting quietly beneath everything else, like something waiting to be acknowledged. I kept my eyes on the horizon, even though there was nothing to see beyond the line of trees, just distance, just the idea of a world that still existed outside of this one. You said I should learn the rules, I said after a moment, my voice steady again, more grounded than before. So start with something simple. He did not move, but I felt his attention sharpen slightly, like the question mattered. What am I allowed to do here? There was a brief pause, not hesitation, just consideration. You can move freely within the house and the east grounds, he said. You can ask for anything you need, and it will be provided within reason. I turned my head, slightly glancing at him. Within reason, I repeated. He held my gaze evenly. Within the limits of what keeps you here. I let out a slow breath because that part made sense even if I did not like it. In communication, I asked, phone, internet, anything that connects me to the outside world. His expression did not change. Not yet. He said simply. I nodded once because I expected that answer even before I asked. Because they could track it. I said more as a statement than a question. Because it creates variables I do not control. He corrected. And there it was again, that word control, always present, always shaping everything around him. I looked down briefly, pressing my lips together before speaking again. And if I need to contact someone important, I asked, family, friends, anyone who might notice I disappeared. His gaze held mine for a second longer, this time like he was weighing something more personal than before. You give me the name, he said. I decide how to handle it. I frowned slightly. That is not the same as contacting them. I said no, he replied. It is safer. I looked away again, the frustration rising and settling just as quickly, because arguing with logic that was technically correct felt like trying to push against something that did not move. You keep narrowing everything down to what is safe, I said quietly. At some point that stops being protection and starts being something else. He did not respond immediately, and for a second I thought he might ignore that completely, but then I heard it, his voice calm as always, but carrying something just a little more deliberate. At some point the difference stops mattering if the outcome is the same. I turned fully at that, my eyes locking onto his. It matters to me, I said, and this time there was no hesitation in my voice, none at all. The air shifted slightly, not tense, not hostile, just aware, like something had been clearly drawn between us. He held my gaze for a second longer, then nodded once, not agreement, not surrender, just acknowledgement. Then we adjust where it can be adjusted, he said. I blinked slightly at that, not expecting it to be that simple, not expecting him to meet me, even halfway. I studied him for a moment longer, trying to understand where that line actually was between what he would bend and what he would not. So there are limits to your control, I said quietly. Something in his expression almost shifted again, almost, but not enough to fully read. There are priorities, he corrected. I let out a small breath that felt closer to steady than anything else I had managed so far, then looked back toward the house, the open doors, the space that no longer felt entirely unfamiliar, just contained, just structured, just something I had not chosen, but now had to understand. And right now I am one of them, I said. He did not answer with words this time, but he did not need to. The silence said enough. I stood there for another second, then turned and started walking back toward the house, not because I was giving in, not because I had accepted anything fully, but because for the first time since all of this began, I understood something clearly. I could not control where I was, but I could control how I moved inside it. And that was the only place I had any real power left. I did not look back to see if he followed this time. I did not need to. The awareness of him was already there, like a constant. I had stopped questioning. My steps slowed slightly as I reached the entrance, not from hesitation, but from the quiet shift happening inside me, something settling into place, not acceptance, not surrender, something sharper, something more deliberate. The doors opened before I touched them, and I stepped inside, without breaking stride. The air changed again, cooler, quieter, controlled. I paused just inside the threshold for a second, letting the contrast settle. The outside had felt open, even within its limits. This felt different, contained in a way that was harder to ignore. I turned slightly, glancing over my shoulder, just enough to confirm what I already knew. He was there, not close, not distant, exactly where he always positioned himself, like he did not need to follow to remain present. I faced forward again and started walking deeper into the house, my footsteps softer, now measured. The hallway stretched ahead, familiar in a way it had not been earlier, like I had crossed some invisible line without realizing it. Show me the rest of it, I said without turning, my voice steady, not asking, not demanding, just stating what came next. There was a brief pause behind me, then the quiet sound of his steps aligning with mine. You are adjusting faster than I expected, he said. I let out a small breath that almost resembled a smile, but did not quite reach it. I am learning the rules, I replied. That is what you told me to do. We walked side by side, now not close enough to touch, not far enough to ignore the distance. felt intentional like everything else here. I kept my eyes forward, taking in the details I had missed before: the placement of doors, the subtle cameras built into corners, the way nothing was left unaccounted for. Every space has a purpose, he said, as if reading the direction of my thoughts. Nothing here is random. I nodded once because that made sense. Of course it did. Everything about him pointed to that kind of structure, that kind of control. We turned down another hallway, this one quieter, more private, the lighting softer, the walls lined with doors that felt less like display and more like function. This wing is restricted, he said. You do not come here without me. I glanced at him briefly. And if I do, I asked. You will be stopped before you reach the second door, he replied calmly. I looked forward again, processing that not as a threat, but as information the way he intended it to be given. Understood, I said, and for the first time the word did not feel forced. It felt like a decision, a small one, but still mine. We continued walking until the space opened slightly into what looked like a study. Large windows, bookshelves, dark wood, everything arranged with the same precision as the rest of the house. But there was something different here, something quieter, something that felt less like control and more like presence. I stepped inside. Without asking, my eyes moving over the shelves, the desk, the light filtering through the glass. You work here, I said. He stopped just behind me. Yes. I ran my fingers lightly along the edge of the desk, not touching anything important, just grounding myself in something real. This is where you decide everything, I added. He did not answer that directly, but I could feel it in the silence that followed. I turned to face him fully, now standing in a space that clearly belonged to him more than any other in the house. Then let me make something clear, I said, my voice steady, my posture straight. I may be here because of your rules, but how I exist inside them, that is still mine. The air shifted slightly, not tense, not confrontational, just aware. His gaze held mine steady, unreadable, for a second longer than usual. Then he nodded once, not agreement, not approval. Acknowledgement. We will see, he said. I held his gaze for a moment longer, then looked away, first not because I lost, but because I chose to. The room felt different now, not safe, not dangerous, just something new, something undefined. And as I stood there in the center of it, I realized something that changed everything else quietly, completely. I had not just stepped into his world anymore. I had started to take a place inside it. And that was the moment it stopped being only about escape and started becoming something else entirely.